Hello MicroGrinders, Alton from MicroGrinder.com here, back again with another video for How to Beat Bovada 5-0 series. So up to this point I've done several live play videos and I thought this would be a perfect point for me to attempt to do a hand history review video with you. I've never done a hand history review video, but I think after doing all these live play videos, and then in my last session I didn't record it on a Friday evening where there's a lot of juicy games on Bovada 5-0 with a lot of bad aggressive recreational players on, that this would be a good time for me to review some of those hands. So let's get into it. I do use a hold'em indicator HUD, and it has a, let me go ahead and throw that over here so you see what it looks like. It has this built-in hand replayer. We can't mark hands, unfortunately. For those of you that do use the hold'em indicator, you know this already, but for those of you who don't, we don't have the ability to mark hands to review them later, so we kind of just have to sift through them. So what I'm going to do is I'll be pausing the video and switching from one hand to the next. So hand one, I get pocket sevens in the small blind, and the action comes around to me. I do raise. The reason for raising here is that we have this fishy player under the gun. He posts his blind for his first hand at the table in under the gun. The fact that he posts under the gun, doesn't wait for the big blind, and that he doesn't raise tells me that he's a fish, loose passive player, and he has a weak holding, so we want to attack his hand. And I think isolation raising is pretty much the only move here. I think 4 times the big blind is fine. I think that I could also make it to 5 times the big blind since we are in the small blind, and if player 5 does come along, then we're going to be out of position to both players post flop. So definitely in this situation we always want to be isolation raising. When player 5 goes ahead and he 3-bets me, and player 6 under the gun folds, I do fold. I think I have 2 options here. I don't like calling. I think calling is way too passive. The first reason for not wanting to call is we give the big blind the initiative for the rest of the hand. So when we give them the initiative, we're not going to like many flops, we're not going to like a majority of flops, and we are either have to take the line of trying to take it away from him post flop, regardless of what it flops. And also, in terms of calling, when he raises, he only has 60 big blinds behind, so we're not really getting amazing implied odds for set mining. You know, you're only going to hit a set 1 in 7.5 times, so if you think about that, you know, you have to put another 40 cents in there. You're not really getting that great of implied odds. You would have to stack him to essentially break even for an implied odds. So I think we either need to fold or we need to 4-bet bluff him, so turn our sevens into a bluff and 4-bet him. But seeing how it's only 5 hands in, we don't have any reads on him. I don't like bluffing him in this spot, the fact that he's short as well. If I bluff him with my sevens, and if he comes over the top, it's going to put me in a difficult spot because it's going to give me decent odds given that he's so short stacked. So I think folding's a pretty good move here in this spot, not really knowing what this player is going to do. Alright, on to the next hand. So in this hand I have ace queen suited in the big blind. We have this player, I'm still on the same table as before, but we have this player about 5 hands later, the one that posted in under the gun and didn't raise. He's raising in middle position. And then we have this fishy player on the button that min raises. So, and then he min raises, and then we have our player here, player 3 in the small blind, he calls as well. So when he min raises and he calls, I think this is a good spot for a squeeze play. I also think it's a good spot to call. So when we squeeze play, I think we're going to take down the pot a majority of the time without facing any aggression from player 2 or player 3. I think if we do face aggression, it's going to be from player 6. So I think squeeze play in here, you know, to around 85 cents, maybe 90 cents, you know, squeezing a little on the larger side since there are 3 other players in the pot. I think that's fine. The reason why I think player 2 has a weak holding is that when he min raises like this, he's typically just wanting to build the action in the pot. It doesn't really mean he has a strong hand. It probably means he has a mediocre hand, like maybe pocket deuces through pocket sixes, jack 10, 8, 9 suited, something in, you know, with a good implied odds, something, you know, in the mediocre range, nothing near the top end of his value range. I would expect that a player like this, if he has a really strong hand, he's probably going to 3-bet him to like 45, 55 cents. So I don't put him on strong range, and then when this player in 82-18 comes along, obviously his range is really weak. He's playing 82% of all of his hands, so we're not worried about either of them. When we do 3-bet, if we do 3-bet player 2, we're worried about player 6 coming over the top, and if he does come over the top, it's going to put us in a rough situation with our ace queen suited, because we really don't know much about him. We know that he limps with a weak range, and he's probably raising with a stronger range. So with that said, I think we can either raise or we can flop behind and hope to keep these two fish in the pot, because we know our ace queen is so far ahead of the range that post flop, if we flop a monster, we're going to get a lot of action from a lot of worse. So I do flat, and player 6 flats as well. We flop top pair. I'm not too worried about this flop. I don't think pocket 9s or pocket 8s are in much of player 2's or player 3's range. Pocket 9s and 8s are in a portion of player 6's range. Also, ace X is in a portion of player 6's range. And then for player 2, I think a weak ace is in a portion of his range as well. So in terms of this board being fairly dry, I don't think we need to donk bet out. I think we can take a check call line, because yes, there is a runner straight draw, but there's a backdoor flush draw. So we're not really worried about somebody hitting a monster draw on the turn a majority of the time. So I check. Player 6 leads out for 65% of the pot. Player 2 folds as expected. I'm assuming he probably folded probably a junky, smallish pocket pair, or he just completely, missed out on the flop, with maybe he raised, which is pure crap. But, going back to my initial read that he's raising, with a mediocre range, I think we had a pretty good read on him. And then again, player 3, he had a weak range as well, so he went ahead and folded. Here, I think we flat. I don't see a reason to check raise at this point. I think we can let player 6 here value on himself if either he does have, a medium pocket pair, but I'm assuming a majority of the time, because there were, when he bet, there were still 3 players left to act. I put him on an ace, and I don't put him on a strong ace because I think he would have re-raised with a strong ace. So I think ace king is definitely out of his range. Ace queen is out of his range because we have a blocker to the queen. Ace jack potentially is out of his range. I'm thinking probably ace 10 or below. So we call. We get the turn on the river. I think we can continue with a check call line or check raise line. I personally prefer a check raise line because we have so much equity. We have a draw to the nuts, and if he has some sort of draw here, if he has a jack, if he has a 7, if he has a queen, he's going to come along as well. So we check, and we hope that he bets so we can check raise. Unfortunately, he checks. So when the 4 hits, this is essentially a blank. It changes nothing. He's telling us on the turn that he has a weak range, but he's willing to bet out the flop. So again, I think he still, majority of the time, has a weak ace. So I think we can bet an amount where we can hope to get him to call. I think we have 2 options. We can overbet the pot to look weak, like we missed our draw, to get him to call, or we can bet around half pot to around 60% of the pot and hope that he calls. So we do bet around 60% of the pot, and he calls, and he mucks. I remember reviewing this hand after it played, and he did have a weak ace. He had ace 7 suited. So we put him on a decent range. Unfortunately, when he hit the gutter for the straight, he didn't semi-bluff. Well, actually, he didn't bluff his straight and light value bet his ace. So we weren't able to check raise him there, but we did get a little bit of value on the river. Alright, on to the next hand. This is the very next hand after that hand at this table. We have Jack Queen suited. This guy raising under the gun. Now he's starting to look fairly aggro. His stats are going to 43-29, but again, it's only 7 hands, so we really can't tell. The fact that he raised a7 suited last hand tells me he's a bit of a regular stats raising with that from middle position. So I put him on, probably a loose tag style type of stats. So we get our queen jack in the small blind. He raises, and then we have player 2 here, this fishy guy that did a min raise the previous hand. Now he's just jamming all in. At this point, I think he has a really strong hand. The fact that the last hand that he min raised with a 3-bet from 15 cents to 25 cents, and then the following hand he is going from a standard raise here to an all-in for just over 80 big blinds, tell me either he's purely bluffing and he wants to gamble, or he's at the top of his range. So I think here, obviously with our hand we're folding, and I think that player 6 here, if he has a weak holding, he should be folding as well. But what you'll notice on Bovada is you'll see a lot of this crazy play, especially on Fridays. You'll see these guys that just want to gamble. I call it the WSOP syndrome. They've seen too many people say I'm all in, and they get a strong hand. Somebody raises, they just shove all in. They don't understand the concept of 3-betting and 4-betting. They just jam it all in. So when you see something like this and somebody's jamming for like 80 to 120 big blinds pre-flop to standard raise, always assume that they're at the top of their range. If they're like 20 to 30 big blinds, you can make a hero call with a marginal hand, and usually be a coin flip. But in this situation, it's just a standard fold. And we fold, and player 6, the original rager, folds his. Alright, on to the next hand. So this is going to be the next hand. Just after that hand, we get ace-5 suited on the button. If it comes around to us, we have two options. We can ISO raise, or we can limp behind. And we do ISO raise. I like ISO raising. When we have a 54-8 limping under the gun, we really want to isolate and attack this player. Ace-5 suited in position is a really strong hand. If we flop any ace, we flop top pair, we're going to get value from him a majority of the time. And we can make the nuts with the wheel or the flush. So we isolate, small blind calls, big blind folds, and the original limper folds. So when this guy calls, we put him on a really weak range. He's playing 75% of his range, and he is folding 100% to c-bet. So I think we can probably c-bet close to 100% of the time and expect him to fold a majority of the time, regardless of what the flop is. And this is a good flop for us. Yeah, he could float us with a small pocket pair. He could float us with an ace or a king. But since we isolation raised this player, we're repping a strong range. We can rep a queen. And I think that if we bet just over half pot here, we'll probably take it down a majority of the time. He checks. We bet 30 cents in the 50s, so we bet just over half pot, and we take it down. So I think this is a good spot where we're repping a range. We need to continue to rep our range, and this is a good semi-bluffing spot here. It's a possibility that we did have the best hand with the ace high, but there's a possibility we didn't as well. He might have had a weak hand like an ace 7, ace 8 that he laid down as well. Alright, so in this hand I have king jack off. I've switched over to a hand history for a different table. So I have king jack off in middle position, and I believe I do a standard raise. So we're standard opening raise of 3x from middle position. Cutoff calls, button folds, small blind calls, and then we have big blind makes a huge squeeze play raise here. So I think this is a great spot for him to squeeze play, and I think our only move here is to fold. We really don't have any information on him after 5 hands. We could turn a king jack off into a bluff and 4-bet bluff him, but that would be around $1.50. I don't like that in this spot because I have no reads on him. Usually when players are 3-betting and they're 3-betting that large, they have a really strong hand. So in this spot, I think the best play here is to fold. We also don't know what player 6 or player 2 is going to do because we have to act before them. So I think folding here is the best play. And we do fold. And the other players fold around to him. So I think that was a great play on his part. Okay, so in this hand, we have pocket 3s on the button. Player 4 in the cutoff limps. I think we have two options here. We can either isolate raise or we can limp behind. I think either's fine. Personally, with small pocket pairs in position, I don't mind limping. The reason I don't mind limping is because with a pair this small, let's say pocket fours through pocket deuces, you're really going to hate most of the flops, and you're going to end up bluffing on most flops anyways if you do take the initiative pre-flop. So in that essence, we're only going to flop a set 1 in 7.5 times, so I don't mind limping behind with small pocket pairs in this spot. Given his stats that he's a fishy player, he's not folding to any c-bets. I think that if we do spike a set and he has a piece of the flop, he's going to come along and we're going to get more value that way instead. So I think I can either isolate raise here profitably, and then if I hit a portion of the flop and he misses, then I think we can take it. But if I miss, I think he's not going to fold, given his fold to c-bet stats is 0. So I think calling here is fine as well. And so I do opt for the call. Small blind folds, and big blind go ahead and just checks. On the flop, we flop the nuts. Nobody has pocket queens in their range ever here, even a 48-10 and a 38-6. So we have the nuts at this point on this flop. We know we have the best hand 100% of the time. The question is, how do we get value? If it gets checked over to us, I think it's an easy bet. I don't think we have to bet much. I think we can bet, somewhere between 50 and 65% of the pot to get some value on here and start building the pot. Because I think they're going to call with any flush draw. It's potentially likely that one of them has a queen in their range, and then also if anybody has an ace or a king, they're probably going to float as well with that, and they're also going to float if they have a small pocket pair like 4s, 5s, or 6s if they decided to limp with that as well. So it checks around to me, and I end up betting just under half pot. Actually, I don't like that bet. I think I should have bet a bit higher. Going back to the size of the pot being at 17 cents, I think betting around 10 or 11 cents is better. But given that it's so small, 8 cents, the difference between 10 or 11 cents and 8 cents really isn't that much. So I do like that I bet. Granted, I think the sizing's a bit small. When player 1 min raises me, this could mean a variety of things. He could have a queen, and he just doesn't know how to play, and he thinks that by raising my raise, that's aggression in his mind, and he wants to keep me in the pot. He could have a flush draw, or he could have a small pocket pair like 4s or 5s or 6s. And then when player 4 calls as well, I'm thinking here, well, the odds that one of them has a queen is very likely. He would not have raised, and he would not have called a raise with me opening after checking without a queen. So I'm assuming somebody in here has a queen, and I want to start getting value now. So I think I need to make a raise. I think that we can raise a bit on the larger side because we're going to get called by a queen a majority of the time, and we still might get called by a flush draw. One of the reasons why we don't want to play our threes passively here is because it's easily vulnerable to any turn or river cards. Any queen X hand could, they could hit one of the 3 outs on the turn or one of their 6 outs on the river to make a bigger boat, to make queens full, and the next thing your threes are no good. Your threes full of queens were just counterfeited. So I make a raise. I make around a pot size raise, and I think this is fine. I think it might be a tad on large size, but I think that's fine. Player 1 goes ahead and jams, so at this point I'm putting him on a queen. And then, interesting enough, player 4 jams as well. So at this point, one of them has a queen. It's very unlikely that both of them have a queen, but if they do have a queen, good for me. Granted, at this point it's an easy call. And let's go ahead and set up the option so we can see their whole cards. And luckily enough for me, they both have a queen. Now, granted that I do have threes full of queens, it's still a scary spot for me because if you think about it, any 10 or jack hits the turn of the river, then I just got counterfeited and queens full wins. Right now, they both have 3 outs to make a larger boat. On the turn, when the 8 hits, it gives them more outs, so they both picked up additional equity as well. An 8 hits and they chop the pot, and then they both have a queen or a jack. So I lose to an 8, a 10, or jack, so that's roughly 9 outs, 9 cards in the deck between the both of them. That beats me, and that's a decent amount of equity. So I think in this spot I'm still going to lose around 20% of the time, since there are 9 outs to beat me. And luckily I hold up and take it down. Alright, so I have pocket twos in this hand, and I think this is a good example of how you should play your small pocket pairs if you're first to open. I have pocket twos in middle position. For a beginning player, I actually don't recommend opening pocket twos in middle position. I think you should be opening either 5s or 6s and up, because you're not going to like many flops. But as you improve post flop, I think that it's fine. So I do make the open with my pocket deuces in middle position, and I get called by the big blind, who's a 36-27. So he has decent regular stats so far. It's only 11 hands. I think it's going to normalize, but there's not a big gap between his raising and his limping, so I think he's a decent player, and he's just not calling me with junk. When the ace flops, when we have a 9-3 ace rainbow board, this is a really dry board, and I think this is a great board to rip an ace. So at this point, we're not playing our hand, we're playing our range, our opening range, and we're within our range. An ace is easily within our range here. Granted, an ace is within his range, but we always want to be c-betting this pot because it's so dry. Ace high boards and king high boards in general that are really dry, where there's not many draws on there, and it's not connected, those are the perfect boards to be c-bet bluffing. So if it checks around to me, I'm hoping that I'm betting, and we don't have to bet that much. I think anywhere from 50 cents to around 2/3 pot is more than enough to take down the pot a majority of the time. If he doesn't have an ace here, if he doesn't have a 9, he's going to be folding out the rest of his hand, because he's going to assume that I'm c-betting with an ace a majority of the time, and a lot of players at the micro stakes just play fit or fold. And so I do bet out just under 2/3 pot, which I think is a good bet size here. We could even go a little smaller and it'll work the same majority of the time. And when player 2 check raises me on such dry board with pocket deuces, this is just an easy fold. He's check raising us with a very strong range here. He's not getting out of line. He hasn't 3-bet at all anywhere. Granted, he is not folding to any c-bets, but he looks like he's not getting out of line with his raises. So when he c-bets us to 3x, we need to put him on a set of 3s, a set of 9s, ace 9, ace 3. We are just, any ace x in general, any pair, even pocket 4s beat us at this point. So with pocket deuces, it's just a simple fold. And we fold. Alright, in this hand we have ace jack off in the small blind. It gets folded around to us. I think it's a pretty standard line we should all be taking, is we should be raising in the small blind anytime we have something similar to the cutoff range, but of course this is at the top of our value range, so we're always going to be 3-betting here. Not 3-betting, but pre-flop raising here against anybody that's in the big blind, regardless of what their stats are. So we raise, and I wanted to do this example again to show you just the crazy things that players will do at the micro stakes, and he just jams all in. The fact that his stats over 14 hands, he's a 29-7, so that he's limping not an overly large majority of his range, but a decent amount of his range, and he's only raising the top 7% of his range. So he obviously has a really strong range here. I would be inclined to potentially even fold ace king off in this spot, because we could easily be running into aces and kings the majority of the time when he's just jamming. This is just the thing that fishy players do. Like I said before, I made a 15 cents raise and he's just jamming all in for close to 120 big blinds, which is just a really bad play. The only thing I'm ever going to look him up with is aces, kings, and queens, and potentially ace king suited. But looking at his stats, he's not getting out of line. His aggression factor is 1, and he is 3-betting 14%, but I think this is actually included in this raise here over 14 hands. We really can't look at this 14% right here and make any conclusions from it. So the only move here with ace jack off is the fold. And we fold. So this hand we have ace queen suited on the button, and we have two players that limped in. Under the gun limps in, and the cutoff lumps in. In this spot, we always need to be isolation raising, and I just wanted to highlight this point that we are always isolation raising when we have multiple limpers and we're at the top of our range. So even if 3 players limped in, I'd be ISO raising with ace queen suited. What I like to normally do is do 3x plus 1 for each limper. So we have 2 limpers. I make it a 5x raise here. And I'm assuming a majority of the time when I do this, we have a 50-0 and we have a 54-0. I'm assuming that they'll be folding, majority of the time when I make such a large raise. And they fold, and that just shows the importance of aggression and making your isolation raises large enough. If they were stationary, so if player 4 or player 2 didn't like to fold, and they had a history at this table with me of calling isolation raises, I'd actually make it larger because we can play in exploitive manner on Bovada. Since we are playing an anonymous play, nobody knows who the other player is. But this just shows that when players are limping and we're at the top of a range, we always need to be isolating. So in this hand we have King Jack off. We are in middle position. We make a standard open. Comes around, and player 2 here in the small blind, a 53-0. He goes ahead, he calls, and folds back around to us. Interesting enough, he goes ahead and he donks bets out for roughly 2/3 pot. At this point, when a bad player donk bets out on such a dry board, you have to put him on a value range. And I am putting him on some sort of an ace. Whether it's a strong ace or a weak ace, we really don't know. I would lean more towards a weaker ace than a stronger ace. Simply, when I see something like this and I'm at the micros, I just go back to my standard population reads that when a bad player donk bets out for a large amount, it's a value bet in their mind. They don't understand the concept of checking to the razor. They understand the concept in their mind that I called a flop, a pre-flop raise, the flop comes out, I hit a good hand, I'm going to bet it. So at this point, I'm definitely putting him on ace-x a majority of the time. Yes, he does have a straight draw in his range as well. Maybe he has a wheel draw, maybe he has a draw to the nut straight. But I think a majority of the time, he's just going to have an ace. And it's not going to be that strong of an ace. And he's just betting out his ace because he's a bad player. So at this point, I think I have 2 options. I could raise him here with my gutter draw and show great strength and take it down. Or I could elect to smooth call and hope to hit a queen and stack him. Looking at his stats, he's already down over buy-in, over 15 hands. Tells me that when he gets a piece of the board, such as top pair, he tends to go with it. So my thoughts are that if I do raise him, he may come over the top and put me in a tough spot with my gutter straight draw. So in this instance, because based upon how much he's already lost and me not having any specific reads on him in this hand history review with notes, I think that calling is an okay move. So I think I call. I do call. And the turn is an excellent turn. We go ahead and turn the nuts. The only thing that beats us is potentially on the river is if he does have 2 pair and the board pairs. Other than that, I think we're good. There's nothing that beats us at this point. So at this point, it'll be interesting to see what he does. If he bets out, I think we can check raise here. Based upon my previous reads of him, if he has a piece of the pot, he tends to go with it. See now, he's already down $6. So he makes a fishy bet, and I should be 3-betting here. I do. I 3-bet to 70 cents, and I think this is a good sized bet. The reason for it, it's around 70% of the pot, so it's not too large and it's not too small. It makes it so it's a size that he can call, and it makes it so the pot is large enough where you can get stacks in on the river easily. So when we are doing our raising here on the turn, and we need to think in terms of what can we get him to call with the 3-bet, and how can we size it so we can easily get stacks on the river. When I make it 70 cents, it'll build the pot up so it's just over the size of what he'll have left, and so we are not too worried about doing close to a pot size bet and getting stacks in. So I think it works out well in this point. I'm hoping he calls. Of course, if he raises, we're just going to go ahead and jam over and get it in. But if he calls on the river, we're obviously looking to get stacks in. So he calls, and I think it's sized perfectly. He has just under a pot sized bet. So obviously on the river, if he bets, we're going to be raising. If he jams all in, we're obviously going to be calling with the nuts. And if he checks, we're going to put him in. So he jams, and it's just an easy call for us when he goes all in. And he ends up showing his cards, but for some reason they are not showing on here. Let me go ahead and adjust it. So he ended up actually having ace jack, which is really interesting. I think this kind of goes back to my first lecture video for the series where I talked about players that are just limping 100% and not raising. We can't always assume that they don't have a value hand. Obviously he was near the top end of his range for his value hands, and he still limped pre-flop. He didn't re-raise me. He didn't take a more aggressive check raise line on the flop, because he can assume that I'm probably going to bet the flop with an ace, and he can get value by check raising, but he's a level 1. He's not a thinking poker player. It's very interesting too that on the turn when he hit the gutter for the nut straight draw with his top pair, that he only bet out around 28% of the pot as well. So it just shows what a bad player can do at these stakes, and how we can go ahead and we can exploit them. Okay, so I think we'll go ahead and end the video with this hand since we are at 31 minutes right now. I don't want to make it too long. I have king queen off in the cutoff, and I believe if it comes to me, I go ahead and open, which I should be doing. So I open with the standard open in the cutoff. It folds around, and then this is the same table. This is the same player that I just stacked when I hit the nuts, and he just limped. He called pre-flop with his 8-jack off, and he played a very unusual line post-flop, and we got stacks in with the nuts against his ace-jack off. This hand, he decides to take a min-raise line, and I believe this is his first raise. I don't think he's raised prior to this, and so it is showing stats for this hand in here. At this point, I think he does have a strong hand. He may have a pocket pair. He may have ace-queen, ace-king, one of those stronger Broadway type of hands. But for this price, I'm never folding to him, even though he may be raising a range that's it's got me beat or dominated with my king queen off. The reason that I'm not folding is because he makes so many mistakes post flop that if I do get an awesome flop, like say he has ace king, and he flops an ace, and it comes and I end up flopping 2 pair, or I end up flopping trips like a queen queen ace, or let's say he has ace king and I have king queen, and it comes well, actually I went over that, so queen queen ace would give me that. So we're just looking to get stacks in against him when we get a better hand than he does when we flop 2 pairs or better. Sorry for that jarbled explanation there when I was trying to go over that. So we go ahead and call. And this is an excellent flop for us. Interesting enough that player 1 that had called my raise, he decides to come along as well, and he looks like a decent player with his stats, a 31-21. So being in position in the cutoff, I think we have 2 options here. If either player 1 or player 2 bets out, we can take a check raise line, or we can take a check call line. Against these players, I like a check call line rather than check raise. Heads up, I like a check raise against this player. But since player 1 is in the pot, since I have a draw to the nut flush with middle pair here, I like check calling because we can string him along if he has a club as well. So he checks, player 2 goes ahead, and he leads out. At this point, I think we can put him on a really strong range. Ace king, ace queen, aces, queens, we can put him on a very strong range at this point. And when he leads out for that, we're obviously going to be flatting here because we want to string player 1 along as well. If we hit our flush, then we can get value from player 1 in addition to player 2. So we call, and unfortunately player 1 folds. On the turn here, we hit the nuts. So at this point, this player, again, he's been shown to, once he has a hand, he sticks with it, and he plays very aggressively. Not only do we have the nut flush, but we also have a gutter to the royal flush. And We essentially have the nuts here. The only thing that's going to beat us is if the board pairs on the river, and I'm not too worried about that since I have a queen. So, you know, in terms of hands that beat us, there's not that many. So for this reason, he leads out again for a decent size half pot, leaving himself only $1.45 behind. Again, I could check raise him here and look to get it in, but if he doesn't have a flush, he may fold because this is a bad card for even a bad player. They'll notice that if they don't have a flush, they'll fold the majority of the time. So for that reason, I like calling with the nuts. You know, nothing's really going to beat us at this point unless the board pairs, and it's only going to pair around 18% of the time. So we call. Unfortunately, the board pairs. It's a bad card for us, but granted, even if he does shove, with the odds that we're getting, we have to call. So he shoves. Yeah, if he has ace jack or ace queen, we're screwed here. If he has queens or jacks, we're screwed. But we had to call it off, getting 22% pot odds. And we call, and he has ace king. So unfortunately for him, a bit of a cooler. But again, it just shows that bad players like this overplay their hands in these spots. I think this is probably a check fold by the river. But when we are playing against bad players, we can just kind of let them hang themselves. And unfortunately for him, he did get a couple coolers against me. But it just goes to show that when you're in his spot and the board is just not coming your way and it's going the other way, you kind of need to slow down, especially when that fourth club hits. For him, it's probably a check fold by the turn, but he just kept firing away. And unfortunately on the river, he made trips, and it just made him worse. So, you know, majority of the time, nobody's going to be calling with worse than a club at that point when he jams. And I think that'll conclude our hand history review. Definitely let me know what you think. Definitely let me know what you liked. Critique my hands and how I played them. Definitely open to any feedback. So thank you very much, and look forward to have you watching the next video.